Before I begin, this is going to be more story-oriented, this sermon, but I'd like to read something for you and make sure I have the right place here. It's 1 Peter. Do you have your Bibles? You got it. There's some powerful stuff in this book. 1 Peter. We're going to go to 17 on. Since you call on a Father who judges each person's work impartially. You know the word impartially. You know what that means, right? It means that we're all important to Him, not just a few. He judges work impartially. He's a good judge. You know? There are judges that look at the person, right? Say, I don't like that person, so I'm going to judge in a certain way. But God is not like this. God looks inside and impartially across the board. He cares about everyone. Live out your time as foreigners here in reverent fear. You know why he would say live out your time as foreigners? He's not talking about how we're foreigners in a country that's not ours. He's talking about how we human beings who are with Christ are foreigners in this world. Because we are. We're in the world, but not of the world. We must live like foreigners do. As a nationalist, in whatever country you're in, we invest in our place. But the people of God invest in a country that has foundations and one whose owner and architect is God, right? So he says, live out in reverent fear, for you know that it was not with perishable things. You know what perishable means? You go to the store and you buy bread, and that's perishable, meaning that it can grow moss on it, right? It can get spoiled. Eggs, dairy, unless it's a canned good, and then it'll go for 40 years. I'm not sure if you want to eat it after 40 years. But perishable, you were not bought with perishable things such as silver and gold. You were redeemed from the empty way handed down to you from your ancestors, but with the precious blood of Jesus you were purchased. When John moved from Europe, he was about 10 years old to 11. And he moved to South America. His dad was in the he went from the Swiss Union and the Southern European Division office to, yes, the telemarketers can wait. Yeah, ignore the phone calls. To South American Division President in Montevideo, Uruguay. It was before it went to Brazil. In Montevideo, Uruguay. And James, the president, had 3 kids. One of them was Jerry, one was John, and one was Judy, all the J's. And Emma, we're in the story now. And John, and this is the children's story too, by the way. So if you want to come sit on the front row, you can. All right. John came with them. He was about 11. Turning 12, to a country he couldn't understand the language, Spanish, from speaking Schweizerdeutsch over in Switzerland to Spanish. So the first thing, of course, all kids back then, I mean today it's not so much, but back then all kids need a job. And so John was told you can have a job working in maintenance, because, you know, if you can't speak the language as well, maintenance is a good place to work. You know, you can fix a toilet. You can make sure that things are running. You make sure, you know, broken things are fixed up. Make sure the rose bushes are you know, clipped and the wall is, you know, all these separations. Maintenance is all around, especially when you have a campus. That's a large campus like in Montevideo, Uruguay, and you have these walls around the campus. You needed to have that because you got to protect the area. You know, the little, have you been over there where you have broken glass, you know, put it in the cement? You know, in Thailand it was like that. You had the mission. And everyone on the inside were Seventh-day Adventists, and on the outsides were some Adventists, but it was just the town, you know, and you have this compound. And everything in the compound John was supposed to take care of. And he was learning Spanish, and it wasn't easy. But Spanish is a little easier than English, actually, because Spanish spells like it sounds, as opposed to English, which is kind of like with French, you know, you have this very complicated, you know. So Spanish was what it was, you know. And German was like that too. So Schweizerdeutsch was like that. Anyway, he got with a man named Mr. Sen. Mr. Sen. It's S-A-N, but Sen is how you said his name. And Mr. Sen, and he was the maintenance director, and he always worked with... And John, when he was in Switzerland, his name was Jackie. But when he moved to South America, his name became Juanito. So that was that his name changed, Juanito now, right? And so at home they called him Jackie, but Mr. Sen called him Juanito. And he says, Juanito, come and help me with this. Come help me with that. And he went working here and working there. And, you know, this guy John sometimes would do things good, and then sometimes he'd try to figure things out, and it wasn't right, you know, and Mr. Sen says, no, you don't do that. If there's a problem, you contact me, please. You contact me, and it's back and forth. And Mr. Sen was good in English, kind of, you know, here and there. And as someone that grew up in Montevideo, Uruguay. And, well, they had to go and clean out one of the individuals that worked in the union office. The Webster family, Mrs. Webster. And back then, of course, there was no natural gas. It was wood-burning fireplaces. And in the springtime, you have to clean out your fireplace. You know, you clean it out because it gets moldy, it gets messy. You clean it out, and you prepare it for then the next winter when you use the fireplace again. You put good wood in there so it smells like good wood, you know, and you have it, and you protect the place in that way. Close the flue up or clean out the flue up at the top, sometimes kind of clean out the soot. And that was the job of Juanito or John and Mr. Sen. The only problem was Mrs. Webster was a very 50s girl, 50s lady. In the 1950s, I don't know if you have seen some of the styles. They liked white carpet. Have you ever seen that white carpet? When I was growing up, my grandmother loved white and pink carpet in her room. And Grandma always said, take off your shoes right now. Don't walk on this. It was like a shag carpet, too. You know, it was like the 1960s into the 70s, you know. Very light colors. Everyone has to take off the shoes. And anybody that has been outside of the States knows about taking off your shoes, especially if you've been to Asia or South America or Middle East. You take off shoes, you know, because you don't track in all the dirt. In America, we're used to bringing the shoes in. You know, shoes walk all over the place. But over there, it's not like that. So, first thing Mr. Sen does is says, Juanito, we're going to take the plastic and we'll put it around your leg, and we'll put a rubber band and hold it here and then do it there. Okay, now we go in. Okay, now you see this, Mrs. Senora Webster, it's not, do not make it dirty. She complains about everything. If there's one little spot, she will see it. So please, Juanito, we're going to take care. Now, in the middle of the living room, where the fireplace was, there was a chair, the prize possession, a bright yellow fabric chair, made in the style of the contemporary. What is it called? Mid-century modern, right? But you have these bright colors, the whites, the pinks, the yellows, all these different colors that were 1950s into the 1960s. Do not sit down on that chair, Juanito. Whatever you do, do not sit down. And Juanito was a bigger guy, He was a bigger guy. And he says, you're not going to go sit down on that chair. We've got to clean out the fireplace. So I'm going to ask you, please, you start cleaning out. I'll go clean in the other rooms, but you just kind of clean out the fireplace. Well, as Mr. Sen walked out, did his thing, because of course John is he's the assistant, so he gets to do the dirty job, right? Who here has done the dirty job for others before? Yeah, you know that, right? Whenever you're starting out, you're doing the dirty job. That's just how it is. So John looks at the fireplace, sees all the soot there, and says, he starts to try to sweep, but it's really hard. Trying to get the soot, because soot is, the more you sweep it, the more it makes these lines. So how am I going to take care of this? And you don't want all the dust everywhere when you're sweeping. So John got a bright idea. A very good idea. We have a vacuum cleaner. It's one of those old canister Electrolux type vacuum cleaners. And he kind of checked with Mr. Sen, and Mr. Sen said, I don't know about that, but maybe see, make sure everything is fine, make sure it's okay. All right. So then Mr. Sen kept going about his business, and John got out the canister, plugged it in, put the pipe, the hoses on it, and instead of having the end that was the electrical end that turns, the beater bar, instead you just have it sucking. Out it goes. And it'll go into the bag inside. Brilliant idea. So he started to do this, and it really worked. The corner of it started. And then he started doing the other corner of it. And it was really cleaning up nicely. And the sound was there, and they were busy working on the other side, and he's like, man, this is great. A day, this was going to take 3 hours of cleaning. We just turned it into 30 minutes. This is awesome. This is easy. I want to get out of here. It's going to be lunchtime soon, and it's time to get something to eat. He continues to suck. And of course, there's some pieces of wood that were still in there that weren't completely gone. And as he's just really working it out, all of a sudden he hears this yell. He turns like this and, what? John says. And Mr. said, I can't hear you. So he puts it down. He turns around. And that vacuum cleaner was blasting black soot directly at the yellow chair. I mean, it's like full-on blast. It's like one of those, have you ever seen where someone's cleaning raw sewage and all of a sudden it comes out the back? Maybe you have a comedy that you see and it's just shooting and everybody's, exactly like that. Apparently, there was one small ember, something that wasn't completely burned up, and it must have gotten to the bag. And those bags are usually paper. Sometimes you'll find some bags that aren't, but paper does much better filtering than material. Because paper, you can throw it out, as opposed to the material that you have to wash it, and your hands are filled with soot, with the garbage that's in. So it's paper. Well, apparently it burned a hole. In fact, as he turned around and saw the blasting going, at that moment, he takes and Mr. Sen pulls out the plug from the wall, and it goes down, and all of a sudden it stops down. And then guess what happens? It goes on fire. And then all of a sudden, Mr. Sen, oh! So then he goes running into the kitchen and gets a pitcher, fills it up with water, and guess what? Out. White carpet. Well, not white anymore. And Mr. Sen, ay, what? Madre Dioso, right? You say, mother, what is this? We've got to clean this. This is terrible. And John just turns white. I mean, all the blood leaves his head as he looks. He says, I am definitely fired. But Mr. Sen says, yeah, you're fired, but your dad works here. What's going to happen with me? Oh my goodness. So they started trying to clean. They got another vacuum. They got a wet vac type. You know, the kind that you can pull the water up as well. And they started cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning and cleaning. And Mr. Sen says, John, don't touch the yellow chair. I got it. They got the soap. They started trying to do the soap. And the more they scraped it, the more the yellow turned into brown, which turned into black, which turned into brown, which turned into like a color that's somewhere in between yellow, black, and brown. I'm not sure what that is, but it's not a color that looks good. Whatever it is. As then John continues to try to vacuum up anything on the floor, and that white carpet was looking real brown, dark, especially around the vacuum cleaner, which had actually started burning. And they got it out, they threw it outside. And by about 3 p.m, Mr. Sen says, there's no way. They hadn't had lunch or anything. There's no way she comes home, that Mr. and Mrs. Webster comes home, especially Mrs. Webster, without knowing what happened. John, you speak English better than me. And you're the one that wanted to use the vacuum. You need to go to the office and tell Mrs. Webster what happened. I can imagine, though John is by this time he's around 15. He's like, has that look on the face. You know the look on the face that makes you more upset as a parent? Have you ever seen that look? It's like, and the parent gets even more upset. It's like, how do I change my face so that they're not upset anymore? It won't work. Especially when your yellow chair is no longer yellow and your carpet is no longer white and your entire house has turned into a cave and smells like soot. So, the beautiful white carpets. Fortunately enough, there were doors shut on the room so that the pink carpet on the other side, it was closed up. So, but remember, soot does go through cracks. You know. And the smell cannot be removed so easily. John walked with Mr. Sen all the way. Mr. Sen didn't just send him by himself because, of course, Mr. Sen is He's the boss. They walked together, and John went past his father's office that was the president. He didn't want to tell Dad. He kept going on to the secretary's position, into the office. And the first thing Mrs. Webster does is, "Oh, John, how are you today? I hope things went well with cleaning." Mrs. Webster, "I'm so sorry. Oh, did you get a spot on the carpet? We can figure it out." She was so accommodating. And Mr. Sen, as he walks in, as his sweat is rolling on his face, she starts to realize it was a little worse than that. And John says, "Mrs. Webster, we got some dirt on your carpet and your yellow chair." "Well, let's take a look." So then the long walk. Who here has been in one of those long walks? You're walking, and you don't know how to walk, because if you walk too quickly, first of all, you don't want to get there. But second of all, if you walk too quickly, then you might tell something to the person you don't want them to understand. But if you walk too slowly, that also will tell them something that you don't want them to know. So you just try to have that middle zone walking and let that other person figure it out. You're walking as you're hoping that you melt into the ground. Mr. Sen is walking with John as they went over, and Mr. Sen very nicely opens the front door. And as the front door opened, the smell of embers hits the nostrils. And Mrs. Webster, the one who loved the white colors, the one who is the most stylish out of all the ladies in the office of the conference there in the division office, the one who oftentimes had the hair always in a very nice, very 50s to 60s position, you know, right? The one who loved her stuff that she had purchased from France, or perhaps from somewhere in the States or Germany, walked in to a room with formerly white carpet and a formerly yellow chair. And you know, John had never even sat in the chair. He had been so worried that it might be discolored. Mrs. Webster starts, because she doesn't know, now being Mrs. Webster, I want you to think about it for a second. If you're walking with them and they're so disconcerted, you start thinking as well. And you start thinking about what you're going to see when you get there. And she starts saying, well, we're going to have to, I know a cleaning place, and I know what. No. There is no cleaning place that will make that chair yellow again. John had hyperventilated enough. At the age of 15, he might be 18 by now, about 3 years lost. Mr. Sen also lost a few hairs in the process, for he wore a hat to cover up his balding head. Mrs. Webster was absolutely mortified by the destruction of everything that had happened in her room, in her house, except for the few rooms that had been closed down. Everything was literally, and I literally say literally, toast. After all is said and done, John was crying and so upset and felt so bad and said, "I am so sorry, Mrs. Webster." But here is something that then Mrs. Webster said to John. "Of course I'm upset at what happened. I am so sorry about your yellow chair." And she said, "John, Juanito, Jackie, when we get to heaven, Jesus isn't going to save yellow chairs. Jesus didn't die for yellow chairs. I want to see you in heaven." In a world where stuff is all anybody ever fights about, in a world where money is all that seems to matter, and holdings and maybe it's status, I want you to know that, like Peter said in the Word of God, that word back there, that Bible, like Peter said, Jesus did not die for gold and silver or things that are perishable. Things that can have soot blown all over them are not the things that Jesus died for. But he spent his precious blood for you and for me. I will tell you one thing. John and Mr. Sen actually kind of helped to pay for, for this yellow chair and the destruction that happened. And there were other different ways that things were paid for. But from then on, for all of his life, John knew how important it is to know someone who actually cares about him, rather than just caring about stuff. John is my dad. And he went through it, didn't he? I want you to know, my friends, that whatever you hear on the news, whatever you experience in your life, whatever anger you have in your hearts, which oftentimes we do, because these times are times when we personally don't even know what to feel about some things. Anger comes out like this, because it's all about what I believe or what they shouldn't do or what, all of this. The truth is, Jesus did not die for stuff. Jesus died for people, for you and me, and even those on the opposite side of the planet that sometimes we as human beings don't see as having faces, and they're faceless and nameless. But Jesus knows. He cared, and he cares for you, and he asks for you to be able to be a person that can share the love for others that he has for them, to them. God bless you all.